Hello, hello, darlings. How are you all? It is, excuse me, I was just coughing. It is about 1 minute after 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. I am very red in the face, but not all of that is from coughing. Some of it is just weird stuff. Anyway, good to see you. I'm Tad. I will be here for approximately the next hour. I will be reading. And yeah, so that's what's going on. Just came back today. Actually got out of the house for a while. Went to a memorial for somebody that a lot of us cared about a lot, who is a gentleman named Doc Pelzel, who was the KFJC faculty advisor. I guess he was for like forever, for 20 something years or whatever. Certainly during the pretty much almost the entire time that I was at KFJC, which is a radio station out of Foothill College, but a very odd and interesting radio station, which someday I will tell you some things about for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure none of you in Europe know. But anyway, so we went out to a memorial today, and that was heartening because Doc was very loved and also got to see a lot of old radio chums from back in the late 70s, but mostly in the 80s. And yeah, I'm also having like some weird inflammatory thing at the moment, which is one of the reasons my face is red and why I'm wearing things on my fingers because I injured them just doing normal stuff, which is what happens when I have one of these inflammatory flare-ups. Some of you out there may know about some of these things. You may have your own versions of these or something worse. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on them, but it's been a difficult last few weeks, especially lifting Lemon on and off the bed when she was still couldn't use her back leg. She is now, by the way, speaking of the young dog who just had her knee surgery a couple weeks ago, doing much better. You almost can't tell, except she's still got this odd Mondrian shaved right angle on her left hip where the operation was, where she was shaved for the operation. And she finally wrestled her cone off. So she is now coneless. And she is, of course, much happier. And fortunately, she doesn't seem to be doing things that the cone would normally prevent her from doing, so we don't have to worry about it too much. It was going to come off in a couple of days anyway. She just decided it was time. And as with many things, and when Lemon decides it's time for them to happen, they happen, whether we want them to or not. Anyway, what else has been going on? So I had one last. I told people last week I had thought I was all done with the manuscript for The Splintered Sun, and in fact had one more pass through it. It showed up all typeset and everything like that, and so went through it one last time and still found things to pull out of it, to cut and to chop or to slightly change to make the wording more mellifluous. It is always interesting, and one of the things about being a writer that any of you out there who have similar kinds of creative projects will understand, it's always, you could just keep going forever. Because every time you look at something again, you see things you didn't see before, or something bothers you that didn't bother you before. Or something that you thought was really cool when you put it in the last time, you suddenly look at it and go, that's a bit overkill, or oh, that doesn't work as well as I thought it did, or whatever. So the hardest thing about finishing a book is knowing that you're actually finished with it. And I think I am finally finished with it. There were literally 100 changes in this last thing, and this is after several times through the manuscript. And I'm sure when people read it, when it finally comes out this fall, some readers will say, geez, you should have cut this whole chapter out, or, whatever. And chacun a son goût, as we say, to each their own, is the rough English translation. I think chacun a son goût actually just means to each their taste, so pretty close translation. But anyway, so that was interesting, and I realized, I could probably go back through this two or three more times and find things that I still wanted to change. And again, that is a key thing in anything, not just creative jobs, but all kinds of jobs. You got to know when to quit, or you have to have it enforced on you one way or the other. So, as far as I know, I said this before and I turned out to be wrong. As far as I know, that's it. I will not be asked to change any more things for Splintered Sun, or to review any possible changes that I might want to make. I do still have a few more things to do. I have to write the acknowledgments and dedication and blah, 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 blah. And helped coordinate with Isaac Stewart, who is, as he has been doing through this whole renewed Ostenard thing. Isaac has been doing beautiful maps for the books. And so we will have to get his maps in, because I think he's still finishing them up. But otherwise, except for those few small things, the actual book itself is finally done and finished. Although I said that before and I was wrong, so don't take my word on anything. I see there's a cat in the background and making himself either a lovely little bed over there or a lovely little latrine, one of the two. He has a very bad habit of peeing on blankets, so constantly trekking over across the hall to the laundry room. But anyway, you don't need to know about that. That's probably a bit more information than anybody out there actually wanted. What else? Yeah, no, just like I said, I've been in this flame up, this inflammation thing, which happens every couple of years or so. It's super annoying because it means everything hurts. I'm not going to go into huge detail on it. It's boring as hell. And I'm glad it happened at a time when I'm not actively trying to write every day, because it's mostly, at the moment, it's mostly my hands and wrists. And that is, of course, what I most need to use. And Deborah, quite sensibly, has said several times, well, why don't you think about getting into voice recognition, and working that way? And I have thought about it, and there might be possibilities out there. But on the other hand, I also know that I have 40, 50 years now of a direct conduit from brain to fingers to keyboard, going back to when I first learned to type when I was like 15 or something. And I just don't understand at this point how long it would take me to change over to a process where I was composing with my voice. And I'm more experienced with this stuff than a lot of people, because I did radio for years. I've done theater. I've done some improv comedy. I'm certainly more comfortable making things up and using, my voice and whatnot as the way of doing that. But it still feels like a very different thing than how I write books. And so I may have to do it one of these days if the inflammatory stuff continues to be, if it becomes a bigger issue than it has been now. As I said, at the moment, it's just one of these things that's going to last a few weeks and then, kind of unwind again. And I will be more or less back to normal, or as normal as I ever get. Anyway, I told myself I wasn't going to go maundering on about these kinds of things. Yeah, I know. You're right, PJ. You're right. I said I wouldn't, and I did. So rather than spending any more time feeling sorry for myself on that front, let me check in and see if anybody has shown up. And if they have checked in and said hello. So, who have we got here? I see Suzanne Owen is checking in from sunny Cork, where she says she is there for work. I have been to Cork, and Cork is indeed a lovely, lovely town. And a matter of fact, there have been times when, for various political or economic reasons, Deborah and I have considered moving to somewhere else, and specifically Ireland. Because, of course, Ireland, bless their hearts, they do not, I think they give a tax exemption to writers, which, I'm like, I'm down with that. But anyway, and having been in Cork, Cork was one of the places I definitely have considered. And who knows, we may, go live there some year. There's a lot of places I would like to live for a year, and Ireland is one of them. And I would love to live in Italy for a year. And of course, I still am very emotionally attached to England and would love to go back and live in England for a year. But we, of course, have to deal with all of the dogs and children and things like that that are still hanging about here. So we'll see. But anyway, so hello, Suzanne in Cork, and I'm glad you're enjoying your. I hope you're enjoying yourself there. Cork is a lovely city. Anyway, Rosalba. And Rosalba is checking in from Milan. We have such a lovely cosmopolitan thing going on here. Christy Sanders checking in to say Happy Mother's Day. Yes, that's right. It is now officially Mother's Day. I was trying to order some flowers for Deb and found out that basically most of the delivery places were saying, like, you're out in the wilderness. We're not going there. John Baker, hello, off to see a Pokemon tournament. And it's always lovely to see Tad live. Well, I might contest you on that point, whether it's truly lovely to see me live. But I say go have fun at your Pokemon tournament. I know way more about Pokemon than I should because my son, our eldest child, is a huge Pokemon fan. And the other kids like it too, but our son Connor is like way down with Pokemon. I mean, to the point where he still requests like Pokemon plushies as Christmas and birthday presents because he's got quite a collection. Anyway, so Chris Fobb says, good morning and nice t-shirt. Well, Chris put this t-shirt together, so let me see if I can make sure people can see this here in all of its glory. It is, of course, the three swords, memory, sorrow, and thorn from some book. And yes, Chris, it's a gorgeous t-shirt. That's why I wore it tonight. It has been out of circulation because it was in my hamper for a while. So it's been washed now, and I have trotted it out. So well done, you. It's a gorgeous shirt. Dirk is checking in from Berlin, of course. Sunny Berlin. Oh, good to hear it. Penny Davies checking in, saying Happy Mother's Day to all. Mr. Mark Redman is checking in from slightly cloudy yet sunny West Yorkshire. Holger Steinmetz is checking in from Val d'Isere, and we are well. Jay Sheckley, hello Jay, good to see you, however symbolically that you may be. So nice to see you. Nikki Chetwin checking in from Leicestershire, and looking forward to my partner Mark's birthday tomorrow. Well, good. I hope you guys have a lovely time and wish Mark a happy birthday for me. Speaking of Marks, here is Mr. Mark Craigbaum saying Jai Guru all, which I'm sure you all know is a quote from, well, I mean, it's actually, I think it's something from, like the Upanishads or something, but it's most famous in Western culture as being from Across the Universe by John Lennon and the Beatles. One of those songs that kind of came up in the very last year or two the Beatles were together, although he may have written it slightly earlier when they were in Rishikesh. I believe he did begin in Rishikesh, but that was their whole Indian thing. But then most of the Beatles in the last year or two, forgive me for a little bit of lore mongering here, but most of the Beatles in the last year or two were doing kind of their own projects and only occasionally interacting musically with each other. And I think Lennon did most of that one himself, but he never could quite get a recording of it that he felt entirely comfortable with, which is too bad because there is not a definitive version. There are several versions of the song, but it's always been one of my favorites. There's just some of the imagery is just so beautiful. Anyway. Suzanne Owen checks in to say, I remember Doc well. This is Doc Pelzel, whose memorial we had. She was at KFJC in the mid-'80s. Oh, okay. Well, so was I. But I was, by that point, by the mid-1980s, I'd already been there 5 or 6 years, and I was only coming in to do Sunday night public affairs programming. So we probably didn't get a chance to hang out, but nice to know that you were there. How cool. Winter Rutledge is checking in from Wellington. Hello, good evening. Yes, we are fine. We are basically all fine. Dog healing, other dogs still old and grumpy, but like I said, so what else is new for all of us? Anyway, so Isaac says, hello, Tad. My wife was a DJ at the SUU college station. Oh, okay. I assume that's the, State University of Utah? Something? I'm not positive about that. But yeah, KFGC was a really interesting station, and I will talk about it someday, maybe at some length. But the main thing about it was that we went to an all-new music format in the late 70s, just before I got there. And as a result, we were like the main punk and new wave music station. And we got all the records and we got all the interviews and we got, when people came through town, I mean, I remember spending an evening with Midge Ure when he was in Ultravox and, hanging out with the people from Throbbing Gristle and all this cool stuff. Dead Kennedys. I did an event with the Dead Kennedys with Jello Biafra. But it was just a really interesting place to work. And I actually was music director there for not a really long time. I think maybe like a half a year. But I was following a guy who'd been music director there forever and a day. And so, I was able to put my own stamp on it during that brief time. So we got a lot of really weird music when I was the music director, because I've always been a weird music kind of guy. Nikki says, glad Lemon is on the mend. Thank you, Nikki. Isaac Tim says, I'm a published poet. I've sold over 30 books, not much money in poetry. Man, ain't that the truth? And too bad, because, of course, poetry was the first great literary art form, and it is fallen on hard times in many ways. Suzanne Owen asks, was it Degas who never thought his paintings were finished? Quite possibly, but I'm not sure. I don't remember that specifically, but I could definitely see that. I'm sure a lot of painters feel like that. I mean, some of them, you probably had to take it away from them to get them to stop. Petra says, better late than not at all. We show up from Berlin. Hello. Good to see you, as always, you and Christina. Holger says hello to you. Ron Hyde says, hey, Tad and friends. Hello, Ron. Good to see you. I need to have a conversation with you sometime in the next little while, by the way. Christina Speyer checks in, or Speyer. I've never heard you guys pronounce it, so I'm not sure how the last name is pronounced. But anyway, and saying Mother's Day over here, so big shout out to all the mothers. Yeah, it's Mother's Day tomorrow here, as far as I know. There's a kind of an unpleasant, don't even know who that is. Obviously some kind of an idiot. And let's see who this idiot is, just out of curiosity. Now, for some reason, it's not. Holger, there's Holger again, and they're all saying hello to each other. Laura Carosi checking in from Buffalo. Ah, excellent. Hello, happy Mother's Day to you too. And Ron checks in with mentioning that he has kissed the Blarney Stone. Thank you, Christina, on the shirt. Yes, that's, and Isaac, that is a Southern Utah University, says Isaac. Okay. Yes, it is a nice shirt, and it was put together by Chris Fab. A whole merchandising thing that is too complicated to talk about now. And Isaac says, not to be confused with USU, Utah State University. Not confusing at all. I'm totally confused by life, Isaac. So no need to make light of yourself. Life is just completely confusing to me these days. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to start reading. So just to reiterate for anybody who might be new, what I am reading now is something I've actually read before, which is some sections from the first Otherland volume, which is the only Otherland thing that I've read on the air. Although I'm seriously thinking about reading the second volume after this. But anyway, and one of the reasons that I'm reading it, again, those of you who've been following know this already, but for anybody new, one of the reasons I'm reading it is because we just finished reading Alice Through the Looking Glass, the original sequel to Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And I was talking about all the ways in which the themes and the moods of Through the Looking Glass affected me very strongly as a young reader, and how it became something that I wanted to rejigger in my own particular métier for the Otherland books. And because the Otherland books are full of things that fascinate me, that I decided to turn into virtual worlds, which of course is the point of the Otherland network. Is it is a network of virtual worlds created by extremely rich people, so that they can eventually leave their bodies and go live in these worlds where they will be functionally like gods and immortal. So that part of godhood too. So anyway, in the section that we read last week, Paul had come into the world, into this world called the Eight Squared, which is a version of the Looking Glass chess game. He had met the White Knight in the Nameless Wood, although neither of them knew their name while they were there, but that's taken straight out of the original Looking Glass, the Nameless Wood, although Alice travels through it with a deer, little Bambi type deer. And then Paul was rescued from a bunch of the Red Queen soldiers when he was staying at an inn, and he was sleeping in the stables, by a young potboy named Galley. And Galley has taken Paul to a place called the Oyster House, where Galley and his friends, who are all children, all live together. And those of you who either read through Looking Glass with me, or knew it already, or just simply know the poem The Walrus and the Carpenter, will understand the significance of both these children with oyster names and the Walrus and the Carpenter, and the two characters who are going to show up in this next section. So I'm going to start reading. So Paul has just fallen asleep in the Oyster House after having heard a song about these children having crossed some sea and looking for a place to be, and et cetera, et cetera. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because this is another theme. And as we find out, and again, spoilers for the Otherland series, but I don't think I'm giving away anything too important when I say these children are in some ways very much linked with the real world children who have been injured by the Grail Project, which is the heart of the Otherland network, which is, the plot of a bunch of extremely rich and powerful people to make a virtual universe for themselves so that they will never die. Essentially, they will transfer their consciousness there and will never die. So these children who in the real world, a bunch of injured children in comas, brought the characters into the Otherland mystery, will show up, and versions of them will show up within the books. So, but the fate of these particular children we will find out about. So the song went on, and Paul's eyes began to sag closed. He fell asleep to the sound of Blue's small voice, that's one of the children, chiming against the night. A bird was beating its wings against a window pane, wingtips pattering against the glass in frantic repetition. Trapped. It was trapped. The tiny body, shimmering with green and purple, beat helplessly against the pane, rustling and thumping like a failing heart. Somebody must set it free, Paul knew, or it would die. The colors, the beautiful colors, would turn to ash gray and then vanish, taking a piece of sun out of the world forever. He woke with a start. Galley was kneeling over him. "Quiet," the boy whispered. "There's someone outside. Might be the soldiers." As Paul sat up, the knocking came again, a dry sound that murmured through the vast oyster house. Perhaps, Paul thought, still tangled in the rags of his dream, it's not soldiers at all. Maybe it's only a dying bird. "Get up there." Galley pointed to a rickety staircase leading up to one of the galleries. "Hide. We won't tell them you're here, whoever it is." Paul mounted the squeaking stairs, which swayed alarmingly. Clearly, it had been a long time since anyone so heavy had climbed them. The furtive knocking sounded again. Galley watched until Paul had reached the shadowy upper reaches, then took a smoldering stick from the fire and crept toward the doorway. A thin blue light seeped in through the wide fanlight over his head. Dawn was approaching. "Who's out there?" There was a pause, as though whoever knocked had not truly expected an answer. The voice, when it came, was smooth and almost childishly sweet, but it raised the hairs on the back of Paul's neck. "Just honest men. We are looking for a friend of ours." "We don't know you." Galley was fighting to keep his voice steady. "Stands to reason there's no one here calls himself your friend." Ah, but perhaps you've seen him, this friend of ours." "Who are you knocking on doors at such an hour?" "Just travelers. Have you seen our friend? He was a soldier once, but he has been wounded. He's not right in the head, not right at all. It would be cruel to hide him from us. We are his friends and could help him." The voice was full of kind reason, but something else moved behind the words, something greedy. A blind fear gripped Paul. He wanted to scream at whatever stood outside, to go away and leave him in peace. He put his knuckle between his teeth instead and bit down hard. "We've seen nobody. We're hiding nobody." Galley tried to make his voice deep and scornful, with only middling success. This is our place now. We are working men who must have our sleep. So be off before we set our dogs on you." There was a murmuring sound from behind the door, a grumble of quiet conversation. The door creaked in its frame, then creaked again as though someone had for a moment set a heavy weight against it. Struggling against his terror, Paul began to creep around the upper gallery toward the door so he could be close enough to help Galley if trouble began. "Very well," the voice said at last. "We are truly sorry if we have disturbed you. We will go now. Sadly, we must seek our friend in another town, if he is not here." There was another creak and the latch rattled in its socket. The invisible stranger continued calmly, as though the rattling were something quite unconnected. "If you should happen to meet such a man, a soldier, perhaps a trifle confused or strange, tell him to ask after us in the King's Dream or in other inns along the river. Joiner and Tusk, those are our names. We so badly want to help our friend." Heavy boots scraped on the doorstep. Then there was a long silence. Galley reached up to open the door, but Paul leaned over the railing and signaled him not to touch it. Instead, he moved to where the gallery rail stood closest to the fanlight above the door and leaned out. Two shapes stood on the doorstep, both bundled in dark cloaks. One was larger, but otherwise they were little more than lumps of shadow in the gray before morning. Paul felt his heart speed even faster. He gestured frantically at Galley not to move. By the thin light, he could see some of the children were awake and peering out of various sleeping places around the oyster house, their eyes wide with fear. The smaller of the two shapes cocked its head to one side as though listening. Paul did not know why, but he was desperate that these people, whoever they were, should not find him. He thought his heart must be pounding as loud as a kettle drum. An image came bubbling up through his panicked thoughts, a picture of an empty place, a vast expanse of nothingness in which only he existed, he and two things that hunted him. The smaller figure leaned close to the larger as though whispering. Then they both turned and made their way down the path and vanished in the fog that was drifting up from the river. "Two of them, eh? Are those the strange folk you said you saw?" Miyagi nodded vigorously. Galley screwed up his forehead in an awesome display of concentration. "I can't say as I've ever heard of such before," he said at last, "but there's plenty of strange folk coming through these days." He grinned at Paul. "No offence, but if they're not soldiers, they're spies or something like. They'll be coming back, I reckon." Paul thought the boy was probably right. "Then there's only one thing to do. I'll go. Then they'll follow after me." He said it briskly, but the idea of having to move on so soon made him ache. He had been foolish to imagine that he might find peace so easily. He could remember very little, but he knew it had been a long time since he had been somewhere he could call his home. What's the best way out of this town? As a matter of fact, what's beyond this town? I have no idea. "It's not so easy to travel through the square," said Gally. "Things have changed since we came here, and if you just set out, chances are you'll walk right into the Red Lady's soldiers, and then it'll be the dungeons for you, or something worse." He shook his head gravely and sucked his lip, pondering. "No, we'll need to ask someone who knows about things. I reckon we should take you to Bishop Humphrey." "Who's that?" "Take him to old Dumpy?" Little Miyagi seemed amused. "That great bag of wind. He knows things. He'll know where the governor here should go." Gally turned to Paul as though asking him to settle an argument. "The bishop's a smart man. Knows the names of everything, even things you didn't think had names. What do you say?" "If we can trust him." Gally nodded. "He's a bag of wind, it's true, but he's an important man, so the redbreasts leave him alone." He clapped his hands for attention. The children gathered around him. "I'm taking my friend to see the bishop. While I'm gone, I don't want you lot going out, and I certainly don't want you letting no one in. The password idea is a good one. Don't open the door to anyone, even me, lest they say the word custard. Got it? Custard. Miyagi, you're in charge. And Bay, wipe that grin off your fazoot. Try not to be an idiot just this once, will you?" Gally led him out the back door, which opened onto the headlands and a pine forest that grew almost to the very walls of the oyster house. The boy checked carefully, then waved for Paul to follow him into the trees. Within moments, they were tramping through a wood so dense that they could no longer see the large building just a few dozen yards behind them. The morning fog was still thick and lay close to the ground. The woods were unnaturally silent, except for the sound of his own feet crunching across the carpet of fallen needles. The boy made almost no noise at all. Paul could hear nothing. No wind rattled the branches. No birds saluted the climbing sun. As they made their way beneath the trees, with the mist swirling about their ankles, Paul could almost imagine that he was walking across clouds, hiking through the sky. The idea cast a shadow of memory, but whatever it was would not allow itself to be grasped and examined. And of course, that is him dimly remembering the very first thing that happened with him, which was where, in the middle of what he thought was a World War I battlefield, he was hit by a howitzer shell, obviously should have been blown to pieces, instead found himself in a completely imaginary place with a giant apple tree, if I remember correctly, growing straight up into the clouds, much like Jack and the Beanstalk. And he climbed it up to a castle in the clouds. And you can find out more if you haven't read it by reading it. Anyway, the idea cast a shadow of memory, but whatever it was would not allow itself to be grasped and examined. They had walked for what seemed at least an hour, the slope slanting downward more often than not, when Gally, who was several paces ahead, waved Paul to a halt. The boy silenced any questions by lifting his small hand, then light-footed his way back to Paul's side. "Crossroads lies just ahead," he whispered, "but I thought I heard something." They made their way down the hillside until the land flattened, and they could see a cleared space between the trees with a strip of reddish dirt at its center. Gally led them alongside it with great caution, as though they paced the length of a sleeping snake. Abruptly, he sank to his knees, then reached up to pull Paul down too. They had reached the place where a second dusty road cut across the path of the first. Two signposts that Paul could not read pointed away in the same direction down the crossroad. Galley crawled forward until he could watch the spot from behind a bush not 50 paces from the intersection. They waited in silence so long that Paul was just about to stand up and stretch when he heard a noise. It was faint at first, faint and regular as a heartbeat, but it slowly grew louder. Footsteps. Footsteps. Two shapes appeared out of the misty trees, coming toward them from the direction the two signs were pointing. The pair walked in an unhurried way, their cloaks dragging in the dew-sodden dust of the road. One of them was very large and moved with an odd shuffle, but both were familiar from the front porch the night before. Paul felt his gorge rise. For a moment he feared he would not be able to breathe. The figures reached the center of the crossroad and paused for a moment in some silent communion before continuing in the direction from which Paul and Galley had come. The mist eddied around their feet. They wore shapeless hats as well as the sagging cloaks, but still Paul could see the glint of spectacles on the smaller. The larger had a peculiar grayish cast to his chin and appeared to be holding something in his mouth, for the jutting shapes that bulged his upper lip and pressed against his jaw were surely far too large to be teeth. Paul clutched hard at the mat of needles, digging furrows in the ground with his fingers. He felt lightheaded, almost feverish, but he knew that death was hunting for him on that road. No, something worse than death, something far more empty, grim, and limitless than death. As if they sensed his thoughts, the two figures suddenly stopped in the center of the road, directly opposite the hiding place. Paul's pulse, already painfully fast, now rattled in his temples. The smaller figure bent down and craned its head forward, as though it had somehow become a different kind of creature, something more likely to go on 4 legs than 2. It pivoted its head slowly. Paul saw the lenses spark, as they caught light from the shadowing trees, through the shadowing trees. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly. The larger figure dropped a flat grayish hand onto its companion's shoulder and rumbled something. In his panic, Paul could only hear words that sounded like sealing wax, then set off down the road, waddling so slowly its legs might have been tied together at the ankles. A moment later, the smaller straightened up and followed, shoulders up and head thrust forward in a sullen slouch. Paul did not release the breath burning in his chest until the two shapes had vanished into the mist, and even then he lay unmoving for some time. Galley did not seem in a hurry to rise either. "Going back to town, they are," the boy said quietly. "That's as well. Plenty to keep them busy there. All the same, I think we'll stay off the road." He scrambled to his feet. Paul got up and staggered after him, feeling as though he had almost fallen from some high place. A short time later, Galley cut across the road and led them down a smaller side road which wound through the trees and up a small rise. At the top of the hill, rising from a copse of birch trees, stood a very small castle whose central keep jutted like a pointed hat. The drawbridge was down. The front door, no larger than the door on an ordinary house, stood open. They found the bishop sitting in the front room, surrounded by shelves of books and curios, reading a thin volume in the light that streamed in through the entrance. He fit his wide chair so snugly it was hard to imagine that he ever left it. He was huge and bald, with a protuberant lower lip and a mouth so wide that Paul felt sure he must have a greater than ordinary number of bones in his jaw. He looked up as their footfalls sounded against the polished stone floor. "In the middle of my poetry hour, my
all too brief moment for restful contemplation, still and all.
He folded the book closed and let it slide down to the place where the hemisphere of his belly met his small legs. There was nothing flat enough in the area to be called a lap.
Ah, the scullion lad, I see. Galley, is it not? Tender of the cook fire. What brings you here, pot urchin? Has one of your spitted carcasses suddenly called out for shriving? The fiery pit has a way of engendering such second thoughts.
It took a moment before Paul realized that the hollow drum-like sound was actually a laugh. "I've come asking your help, Bishop Humphrey. True enough." Galley grabbed Paul's sleeve and tugged him forward. "This gentleman needed some advice, and I told him, ask Bishop Humphrey. He's the cleverest man in these parts. And here we are."
"Indeed."
The bishop turned his tiny eyes to Paul, then, after an instant's shrewd examination, let them slide away again. He never kept his gaze on anything for very long, which gave his conversation an air of distracted irritation.
"A stranger, eh? A recent immigrant to our humble shire. Or perhaps you are a visitor of a more transient nature, passing through, as it were, a peregrine."
Paul hesitated. Despite Galley's assurances, he was not entirely comfortable with Humphrey. There was something distant about the man, as though something glassy and brittle stood between him and the outside world. "I am a stranger," he finally admitted. "I'm trying to leave town, but I seem to be caught in some trouble between the red and white factions. Some red soldiers tried to harm me, though I did nothing to them, and there are other men looking for me as well, people I don't want to meet. So we need to reckon out the best way for him to get out of the squared," Galley finished for him.
"The squared?"
Paul was confused, but the bishop seemed to understand.
"Ah, yes. Well, what sort of moves do you make?"
He squinted for a moment, then lifted to his eye the monocle which had been dangling on its ribbon down the expanse of his belly. In the bishop's pudgy fingers it seemed a mere chip of glass.
"It's hard to tell, since you are an outsider, like Galley and his tatterdemalions. You have something of the kern about you, yet something of the horseman as well. You might be another thing entirely, of course, but such speculation as to locomotion would be fruitless for me, like asking a fish whether it would prefer to travel by coach or by velocipede, if you see what I mean."
Paul was lost, but he had been warned that the bishop was prone to talk. He put on an attentive look.
"Bring that over here, boy, the large one."
Humphrey gestured. Galley sprang to do his bidding, tottering back with a leather-bound book almost as big as he was. With Paul's help, they opened it across the arms of the bishop's chair. Paul was expecting a map, but to his astonishment, the open pages contained nothing but a grid of alternating colored squares, each one full of strange notations and small diagrams.
Now, then, let me see."
The bishop traced his way across the grid with a broad forefinger.
"The most obvious course would seem to be for you to hasten here, catty-cornered, to us. But then I have always favored bold diagonals, at least since my investiture. However, there have been reports of an unpleasantly savage beast in that vicinity, so perhaps that should not be your primary choice. But you are rather hemmed in at the moment. The Queen has a castle not far from here, and I take it you would prefer not to meet with her minions, He turned a shrewd look on Paul, who shook his head. "I thought not. And the lady herself visits this area here with some frequency. She moves very swiftly, so you would do well not to arrange any long journeys through her favorite territory, even should she prove to be temporarily absent." The bishop leaned back, making his sturdy chair squeak. He gestured for Galley to take the book away, which the boy groaningly did. "I must cogitate," the fat man said, and let suety eyelids descend. He was silent for so long that Paul began to think he might have fallen asleep, and took the opportunity to look around the room. Beside the bishop's large collection of handsomely bound books, there were also all manner of curious things lining the walls: bottles full of dried plants, bones, and even complete skeletons of unfamiliar creatures, bits of twinkling gemstone. All alone on one shelf stood a huge jar containing living insects, some that looked like crusts of bread, others that resembled nothing so much as puddings. As he watched the strange creatures, and those of you who read The Looking Glass with me will remember what that's a reference to. As he watched the strange creatures climbing over each other in the stoppered jar, Paul felt a pang of hunger, which was followed a moment later by a surge of nausea. He was hungry, but not that hungry.
"While there is a great deal to be said for the order which Her Scarlet Majesty has brought to us during this extended period of check,"
the bishop said abruptly, making Paul jump,
"there's also something to be said for the more laissez-faire attitudes of her predecessor. Therefore, while I myself have excellent relations with our ruler, as I also did with the previous administration, I can understand that you may not be so fortunate."
Humphrey stopped and took a deep draught of air, as though struck breathless by his own admirable rhetoric.
"If you wish to avoid the attentions of our vermilion monarch, I suggest you must take the first alternative I proposed. You can then pass through that square and find yourself directly at the border of our land. The terrible beast said to inhabit the area is doubtless a fantasy of the peasantry, who are famously prone to enliven their dull and rusticated routine with such tales. I will draw you a map. You can be there before sunset. Carpe diem, young man."
He spread his hands contentedly on the arms of his wide chair.
"Boldness is all."
While Galley scurried to find the bishop's pen and paper, Paul seized the chance for information. He had been traveling in fog, figuratively and literally, too much of late. What is the name of this place?"
"Why, it is sometimes referred to as the 8 squared, at least in the oldest and most learned of tomes. But those of us who have always lived here do not often find cause to refer to it, since we are in the midst of it. Rather like a bird, do you see, when asked to define the sky."
Paul hurried to ask him another question. "And you were once on good terms with the White King?"
"Queen. None of us have ever met the somnolent seigneurs of our humble territory. They are rather absentee landlords. No, it is the ladies, bless them both, who have traditionally kept the order within the 8 squared, while their husbands stayed close to home."
"Oh. Well, if you were on good terms with the White Queen, but the Red Queen now rules the land, how do you manage to be her friend as well?" The bishop looked a trifle annoyed.
"Respect, young man. In a single word, that is it. Her Scarlet Majesty relies on my judgment, and I am consulted on things secular as well as superworldly, I might add, and thus I am possessed of a rather unique status."
Paul was not satisfied. "But if the Red Queen finds you've helped me, despite the fact that her soldiers have been looking for me, won't she be annoyed? And if the White Queen ever gains back her power, won't she be furious with you for being so close with her enemy?" Now Humphrey seemed truly put out. His sparse eyebrows moved together and tilted sharply downward over the bridge of his nose.
"Young man, it does not become you to speak of things beyond your expertise, whatever may be the current fashion. However, in the interest of beginning an education, which you obviously sorely need, I will explain something."
He cleared his throat just as Galley reappeared, bearing a plume and a large sheet of foolscap. "I found them, Bishop."
"Yes, that's fine, boy. Now, hush."
The bishop briefly fixed his small eyes on Paul before allowing them to roam once more.
"I am a respected man, and I dare not, for the good of the land, throw my not inconsiderable weight behind either one faction or the other. For factions are impermanent, even ephemeral, while the rock upon which my bishopric is founded is made of the stuff of eternity. So, if I may create an analogy, my position is that of someone who sits upon a wall. Such a perch might seem dangerous to one who, without my experience and natural sense of balance, gazes up at me from below. In fact, to such a one, a man such as I might seem in imminent peril of a great downfalling. But the view from up here, from inside here," he tapped his hairless head, "is quite different, I assure you. I am, as it were, made in the perfect shape for wall sitting. My master has designed me, as it were, to balance permanently between two unacceptable alternatives."
"I see," said Paul, who could think of nothing else to say. The bishop appeared to be in a much better mood after explaining. He rapidly sketched a map, which he handed over with a flourish. Paul thanked him. Then he and Galley left the tiny castle and thumped back across the drawbridge.
"Leave the door open," Bishop Humphrey called after them. "It is too nice a day to miss. And after all, I need fear no one."
Looking down as they thumped across the drawbridge, Paul saw that the moat was very shallow. A man could walk across it and barely get his ankles wet.
"I told you he'd have the answer you needed," Galley said cheerfully.
"Yes," said Paul, "I can see he's the kind of fellow who has answers to things." It took most of the afternoon to walk back. By the time they reached the oyster house, the sun had vanished behind the forest. Paul was looking forward to a chance to sit down and rest his legs. The door swung inward on Galley's first knock.
"Curse those addle-pates," the boy said, "larking about, and they don't remember a thing I've told them. Miyagi, Chesapeake."
There was no answer but echoes. As Paul followed the boy down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps as stark as drumbeats, he felt a tightening around his heart. There was a strange smell in the air, a sea smell, salty and unpleasantly sweetly sour. The house was very, very quiet. It was silent in the main room as well, but this time no one was hiding. The children lay scattered across the floor, some struck down and left to lie in strange postures like frozen dancers. Others piled carelessly together in the corners, things that had been used and cast away. They had not merely been killed, but violated in some way that Paul could not completely understand. They had been opened up, shucked, and emptied. The sawdust on the floor had clumped in sodden red balls and still had not sopped up all the red, which gleamed sticky shiny in the failing light. Galley fell to his knees, moaning, his eyes so wide with horror that Paul feared they might burst from his skull. Paul wanted to pull him away, but found he could not move. Written on the wall above one of the largest piles, arching above the pale, spattered arms and legs and blind, wide-mouthed faces, smeared across the boards in sloppy scarlet letters, was the word custard. And I think that's where I'm going to stop for tonight in terms of reading, because that's the end of that chapter. And then in the book, it's a couple of chapters ahead. Does this allow me to go to a location? No, I don't want to do that. So let me... Well, actually, I can find it next time, so I don't need to worry about that. So anyway, but I'm sure I mentioned some of them as I was going along. There were a lot of things that I used. I mentioned this last week. I was really, really interested in using some of the things that I had not had a chance to use before in the other books. And what was really nice about it, what worked out really well for me with the Otherland books, was that this idea, which again is a bit of a spoiler, but it becomes clear fairly early in the story. This idea that they were not merely real people in the Otherland network, like the people from the real world who had entered the network trying to find out why children in their lives had been struck down because of connection with the Otherland project, but also that there were versions of characters or people within the network whose origins were not clear. It was not clear why these people existed, but for instance, Paul in this chapter has a dream about a bird, a blue and green bird caught trying to get out. And of course, this is a callback to the Jack and the Beanstalk scene at the beginning, where Paul meets a young woman who is also somehow a bird. And she is telling him, as in the Jack and the Beanstalk story, get out, the giant is coming. Don't stay here. And then the giant shows up. So she, the bird woman, is a character that keeps arriving in different forms. And as the story goes on, it becomes not clear what she is. That you don't really find out till the end, but it becomes clearer how frequent she is throughout the system, that there are different versions of her in many different parts of the system. Similarly, in this chapter, God, the cats are really rioting tonight, aren't they? It's the witching hour. So similarly, in this section here, we met Tusk and Joiner. Well, obviously, that's only their names in the 8 squared. It's also equally obvious, I'm sure, what those names refer to, the walrus and the carpenter. But Tusk and Joiner are the same as Finch and Mullet and various other characters who are almost always, not always, but almost always, their position in the story is that they are pursuing Paul on behalf of some other agenda. And they are trying to catch him, and Paul knows instinctively that they are bad, that there's something very, very creepy and disturbing about them, and he cannot let himself be caught by them. And they started out as his sort of guards watching over him in the World War I simulation, and then he escaped. And as he was escaping from that simulation, helped by somebody that we find out later who that was, but as he escapes the simulation, he sees them kind of begin to change form and realizes, these were not my friends. They were, essentially my guardians, my wardens, they were watching over me. And then again, although his memory is bad, versions of them keep showing up. So it was one of the really entertaining things about working on this book was going from world to world, many of which are based on real things, like Through the Looking Glass, quite a famous book, or the Oz books or whatever, and being able to look for almost Jungian archetypes that would match with these different characters who keep showing up in different guises throughout the books. I'm sure it makes them a little confusing. I'm sure some people kind of go like, whoa, who's this guy? Who's this guy? What's this? How come they're like that? Because wasn't that the people who came in before, but they had a different name or whatever, you know? I'm sure that it's somewhat confusing, but for me, it's part of emphasizing the, first of all, the dreamlike nature of this experience, especially for Paul, who for most of the story does not know why these things are happening to him. And it's not until somebody actually tells him, I think in the third volume, what's going on that he comes to realize, although he still doesn't know why he's there, but he comes to realize that he's in a virtual network and he is going from one virtual world to another through these virtual worlds in a virtual universe, which is a created place and not a real place at all. Anyway, with that, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. I will be back. We will get to the Red Queen and a special guest appearance by everybody's poetic favorite from Through the Looking Glass. Until then, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones, your family, your friends. Have an eye out for anybody else who might need a helping hand or a kind word. I will be back at 7 p.m. to finish up, I think, this whole bit, and then we'll start thinking about what we will read next. So again, as always, I thank you so much for spending time with me. It is a great pleasure. I enjoy it very much, and I will talk to you real soon. So peace, be well, and arrivederci, ragazzi.